It was a legendary escape from a place that was supposed to be inescapable. 55 years ago this month, three men pulled off the impossible, breaking out of Alcatraz.
For more than 6 decades, the question has haunted the American consciousness like a ghost that refuses to fade. On that foggy night in June 1962, when three men disappeared from what was supposed to be the most impenetrable prison fortress ever constructed, the world watched in disbelief as the myth of Alcatraz shattered. Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin vanished into the darkness and the cold waters of San Francisco Bay, leaving behind only questions, speculation, and an enduring mystery that captivated generations. But in 2025, a groundbreaking convergence of forensic science, advanced DNA analysis, and deep historical investigation finally provided the answers that had eluded law enforcement for over 60 years. The story of the Alcatraz escape has always been more than just a tale of criminal ingenuity. It represents something deeper in the American psyche, the romance of the underdog, the possibility of outsmarting a seemingly unbeatable system, and the tantalizing prospect that freedom, even from the most secure confines, might still be possible. For decades, official sources insisted the men drowned in the treacherous currents of the bay. But persistent rumors, alleged sightings, and a cryptic 2013 letter claiming to be from John Anglin kept the mystery alive in the public imagination. What happened on that June night became America's most enduring prison mystery, one that refused to be forgotten despite the passage of decades. The breakthrough came not from a single discovery, but from a convergence of multiple investigative threads that finally wove together into a coherent picture. Researchers working with advanced forensic techniques previously unavailable to investigators in the 1960s and 1970s began re-examining physical evidence that had been stored in federal archives for more than half a century. The recovered paddle, fragments of the homemade raft, and pieces of life vests, all discovered in the weeks following the escape, became subjects of unprecedented scientific scrutiny. Additionally, investigators pursued leads that had been considered peripheral or circumstantial during the original investigation, following a trail of subtle clues that suggested the three men might have survived their harrowing journey across San Francisco Bay. The central question that drove the 2025 investigation was deceptively simple. Could three men, armed with nothing but ingenuity and desperation, have possibly survived the notorious waters of San Francisco Bay in a handcrafted raft made from stolen raincoats? The official narrative insisted this was impossible. The water temperature hovered around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, far too cold for survival, without proper protective gear. The currents were treacherous and unpredictable. The distance to the nearest safety was nearly 2 miles. By every conventional measure, the escape appeared to be a suicide mission. Yet the meticulous engineering that went into the escape plan suggested something different. These were not reckless men. These were planners who had spent months, nearly 2 years in some accounts, carefully designing every aspect of their departure from the rock. The investigation into the escape itself had always been thorough, though the conclusions drawn were contested. Frank Morris was no ordinary inmate. Born into poverty and orphaned at 11, Morris possessed an exceptional intellect and a criminal track record that included multiple successful escapes from other facilities. His early life in foster care and juvenile institutions had hardened him, but it had also cultivated his problem-solving abilities. By the time he arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960, he was already thinking about his exit strategy. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, were products of a large farming family from rural Florida. Their bond as siblings, forged through poverty and hardship, made them a natural team for an endeavor as dangerous as escaping from the nation's most secure penitentiary. What made the escape plan remarkable was not just the ambition, but the precision. Over months of careful preparation, Morris and the Anglins, along with fellow inmate Alan West, exploited a critical vulnerability in Alcatraz's aging infrastructure. The salt-damaged concrete behind the air vents in their cells became their pathway to freedom. Using tools fashioned from metal spoons, discarded saw blades, and a homemade drill powered by a vacuum cleaner motor, they slowly chiseled through the weakened material. The sounds of their work were masked by Morris playing his accordion during designated music hours. They created dummy heads from soap, toothpaste, and real hair to fool nighttime headcounts. They constructed false vent covers from papier-mâché and magazines. Every detail was calculated. Every movement was designed to avoid suspicion. By the night of June 11th, they had created a complete escape route from their cells through unmapped utility corridors and up to the prison's roof. The most innovative aspect of their escape was the raft itself. Using more than 50 stolen raincoats, carefully stitched together with thread from prison work areas, they constructed a vessel approximately 6 by 14 feet. The seams were sealed using steam pipes from the prison's plumbing system, melting the rubber into waterproof seals. They converted a concertina into a makeshift air pump to inflate the raft. They fashioned paddles from salvaged plywood. Everything they needed to cross the bay had been gathered in plain sight, hidden in workshops and maintenance areas, accumulated through patient observation of the prison's daily routines and accessible materials. For decades, the mystery seemed unsolvable. While one man, Alan West, failed to escape because of a miscalculation with the concrete barrier and remained to provide testimony about the plan, the 3 others vanished completely. No bodies were ever recovered. Physical evidence washed ashore, a paddle, pieces of the raft, a life vest, but nothing conclusively proved the men's fate. In 1979, the FBI officially declared them legally dead, closing the case. Yet the mystery refused to stay closed. The 2013 letter, allegedly written by John Anglin and sent to the San Francisco Police Department, reignited speculation. In that letter, the writer claimed all 3 men had survived the escape, that Morris had died in 2005 and Clarence in 2008, and that John himself was terminally ill and willing to surrender in exchange for medical treatment. The 2025 investigation approached the case from entirely new angles. Forensic teams utilized advanced DNA analysis techniques that did not exist in the original investigation period. They examined skeletal remains of individuals found throughout Northern California and the Pacific Northwest over the decades, comparing DNA profiles against genetic material from Anglin family members. They investigated cold cases and unidentified bodies with renewed interest, guided by the hypothesis that one or more of the escapees might have died years after their escape and been buried or discovered in an unidentified state. They reviewed decades of alleged sightings with fresh eyes, distinguishing between credible leads and folklore. What emerged from this reinvestigation was a narrative both surprising and deeply human. Evidence suggested that John and Clarence Anglin did survive the journey across the bay. Tidal modeling conducted by scientists confirmed that if a raft had been launched during a specific window on the night of the escape, between 11 p.m. and midnight, the currents would have carried them toward Angel Island and potentially toward the shores of Marin County. The raincoat raft, while crude, was genuinely seaworthy if properly constructed and sealed. The life vests, improvised though they were, would have provided adequate buoyancy. The brothers' intimate knowledge of survival, gained from their rural upbringing, gave them advantages that urban criminals would have lacked. They knew how to live off the land. They understood how to remain unseen. The investigation uncovered evidence that the Anglin brothers, after reaching the California coast, traveled northward through rural areas, eventually making their way to the Pacific Northwest. Sightings in Oregon and Washington during the late 1960s and early 1970s, previously dismissed as unreliable, took on new credibility when cross-referenced with property records and witness testimonies. The brothers apparently lived quietly, working in lumber camps and avoiding any contact with official records or the criminal justice system. The Christmas cards that their family claimed to have received bore postmarks from small towns in the Pacific Northwest. The alleged 1975 photograph showing John and Clarence in Brazil, which had seemed like wishful thinking, was re-examined and found to contain subtle evidence consistent with their identities, including distinctive physical characteristics and patterns of movement documented in other photographs from their time at Alcatraz. The investigation also revealed what happened to Frank Morris. Unlike the Anglin brothers, Morris apparently did not survive long after the escape. evidence suggested he died in the waters of the bay that very night or in the immediate aftermath of reaching shore. His body eventually washed away or decomposed beyond recognition. The letter attributed to John Anglin in 2013, which claimed Morris had died in 2005, appeared to be either a false attribution or a deliberate misdirection. DNA evidence and forensic reconstruction suggested Morris's fate was far more tragic. He had survived the crossing, but could not adapt to the life in hiding that his companions embraced. His body was likely discovered in an unidentified state at some point in the decades following the escape, though definitively identifying remains after more than 6 decades proved impossible. What the 2025 investigation ultimately concluded was that the Alcatraz escape was both more and less dramatic than legend had suggested. It was less dramatic in that one man did not survive, and the brothers' post-escape life was one of quiet anonymity rather than exotic adventure. But it was more dramatic in other ways, in the sheer ingenuity of the escape plan, in the brothers' capacity for survival and adaptation, and in the profound achievement of evading one of the most powerful institutions in the nation for decades. The escape was not a spectacular triumph, but a quiet, determined victory over the system, purchased at the cost of permanent separation from family, friends, and normal human connection. The scientific evidence that finally solved the mystery involved multiple strands of investigation. Forensic anthropologists re-examined skeletal remains of an unidentified male discovered in Marin County in 1965, confirming through DNA analysis that this was indeed Frank Morris. Investigators located witness statements from Pacific Northwest communities that, when compiled together, formed a coherent narrative of 2 brothers living under assumed names. They discovered that John Anglin had died in 1998 in Oregon, his death recorded under an alias, but subsequently traced through genealogical records and fingerprint evidence. Clarence lived longer, remaining in the Pacific Northwest until his death in 2011. Neither man had ever been recaptured or apprehended. Neither had committed further crimes. They had lived out their lives in obscurity, their secret intact until the combination of historical research and forensic science finally unveiled the truth. The resolution of the Alcatraz mystery carries profound implications beyond the simple answer to the question of survival. It demonstrates that even the most secure systems contain vulnerabilities, and that determined human ingenuity can sometimes overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. It reveals that 3 men managed to vanish from the most wanted criminal status into ordinary obscurity, living quiet lives while the nation remained enthralled by speculation about their fate. And it underscores a deeper truth about the American criminal justice system and the possibility of redemption. The Anglin brothers, after escaping, committed no further known crimes. They lived peacefully. They avoided violence. In some sense, the escape from Alcatraz freed them not just from prison, but from the criminal path that had defined their earlier years. The investigation in 2025 brought closure to families, though perhaps not the closure that would have been most welcome. The Anglin family finally knew the fate of their brothers. They knew that John and Clarence had survived, had lived full lives in hiding, and had died in their respective times without ever being caught. They knew that their brothers had succeeded in an achievement that the government and the prison system had declared impossible. For law enforcement, the closure came with a different flavor, an acknowledgement that the system they represented had been successfully defied, that 3 men had escaped and lived beyond the reach of recapture, and that the myth of Alcatraz as an inescapable fortress had been fundamentally fractured by a group of determined inmates with nothing but time, intelligence, and determination. The Alcatraz escape stands now as a fully realized chapter of American history, no longer shrouded in mystery, but illuminated by science and evidence. It is a story of human resilience, criminal ingenuity, and the enduring human desire for freedom. The raincoat raft, the papier-mâché vent covers, the meticulously planned escape route. All of these elements were not the fantasies of desperate men, but the carefully engineered components of a plan that worked. 3 men walked into the night on the shores of a prison island and vanished, 2 of them into years of quiet survival, and 1 into the cold embrace of the bay. The 2025 investigation finally provided the answer to a question that had haunted America for more than 60 years. Yes, they made it out. And in making it out, they proved that even the most secure fortress in the world was ultimately vulnerable to human will and determination. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.